I'm Sarah Riley. I'm a reader in the psychology department at Aberystwyth University.
I'm Chris Griffin. I'm at the University of Bath, and I'm I guess a critical social psychologist and feminist psychologist.
I'm Adrienne Evans, and I'm a lecturer in media studies at Coventry University.
I'm Yvette Morey, and I'm a research fellow at the Bristol Social Marketing Centre at the University of the West of England.
I'm Helen Murphy, and I'm a social psychologist at the University of East London.
Okay, so we're here to celebrate QMiP, Qualitative Methods in Psychology's 10 years of existence, and part of this is a discussion on digital methods, what's been done so far and what are the challenges for the future. So we thought we'd start with a question around digital research, digital methods. Is there a difference, and what's the lay of the land at the moment?
Something that is a big problem is the kind of terminology between digital and online. People tend to talk about the digital as meaning being on websites and that kind of thing.
It's the shift to really talking about online and offline selves in a way that we used to talk about virtual and the real world, and that is no longer part of people's repertoire, is it?
I mean, if you go back to a very basic definition about social psychology, it's the imagined, implied, or virtual presence of other people. Other people don't have to be there for us to be a social psychological being.
But do you think it's increased that imagined world? I wonder now, with this idea of constantly sharing yourself with the internet, that you actually live with that imagined other on a more permanent basis than we did before.
For me, it's not just the imagined other, it's also being under surveillance. We're also used to being watched in a way that as a routine thing that wouldn't have been there before.
So where do you see the debates about digital methods being then?
In this book, there's a chapter on an ethnography that someone did at a place called Media Lab Prado in Madrid. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's this experimental space where people go who are non-experts, just amateur technologists or people with interest in things, as well as experts, and they work together, they collaborate. Physically, they use physical objects and create physical things, but they also use technology, software, hardware, and different bits and pieces. It wasn't really even about the thing that got made in the end, the prototype, but it was about the fact that the knowledge got made, and so it was about how a research method gets formed. Innovation doesn't necessarily have to always be about the new, and in fact digital methods have been dogged by this idea of newness and innovation all the time, but then in fact innovation can be repurposing old methods for for new contexts.
Facebook is seen as a social psychological epiphenomenon. Actually, it's a digital business product. Psychologists have then approached this human phenomenon and said, oh, it's all about sociality, it's about communities online and so on. But actually, we live in fiscal contexts, and when I look at the research about Facebook, it's really taken what we know in social psychology and then placing it on the screen.
That's where a lot of different disciplinary perspectives do need to come in, because you need to know people who can build platforms and understand how people put platforms together, and you need to understand the business behind it as well as the psychological aspects.
In the era of big data and wonderful number crunching, do we have a role anymore as qualitative researchers to contribute to these debates?
Well, I would say more than ever, really, because without a qualitative or a mixed methods approach, what does big data tell you? What does that mean? Pressing a like button or a comment or a share can mean lots of different things in practice, and that's a real methodological challenge for any researcher.
Social network analysis is actually qualitative in its roots, it goes all the way back to sort of ethnography and observation and things like that, and so there are actually qualitative ways of doing those kinds of bits of research, and you can use things like participatory mapping and walking interviews and observations.
Yeah. We've had some interesting experiences with the reading group that AD and I are part of, and one of your PhD students was very much involved with a Twitter debate about gaming identities, and I found it fascinating because I thought, well, you don't have to look, but people who are more extended into that world can't retreat quite so easily from it.
Yeah, because I can distance myself from some stuff online, but when there was that wave of stuff about Marianne Bertoli, but Bertoli, is that her name?
I think so, yeah.
The French woman who won Wimbledon.
Yeah.
And I saw some of the stuff that was just sexist, homophobic abuse of her for looking like she did. And I was really stunned. And I realised that I was reacting as if it was not online. So it's not just about age, because I'm not enormously engaged compared to a lot of people. But I think if you are, it means as much to your social life is as much online as off. Your friendships happen on Facebook and not, on Twitter and not.
And equally, I think there's that idea of there being a cut-off point where youth are engaging and other people aren't.
Yes,
is really artificial, because a lot of the technology that you need to do some of this stuff is expensive. So young people don't have it.
Which actually brings us on to an issue that you raised previously, Helen, about who's being excluded when we do start to do digital research.
Yeah. Some of the issues about, our personal freedoms and our rights are just glossed over with this digitality. Communities who are struggling just to survive, never mind their digital selves.
I think it's a good point. Although recently I was at it was a mental health conference, and someone was talking about homeless people, and he was saying that I can't remember the statistic, but it was a staggering percentage of homeless people had Facebook profiles, because if you don't have access to, also you don't have an address or any other things, it's one way of people being able to keep in contact with you, and for you to at least have some kind of profile and connection point. But that's not to say that there are a lot of communities that we don't research because they don't.
Or we place a framework of research in them that is meaningless to them and actually might make their situation worse.
So, we have been talking about wearables and the idea of our further connection into the system, shall we say. So the Internet of Things, it's something that researchers should probably know about.
A global, immersive, invisible, ambient, networked computing environment built through the continued proliferation of smart sensors, cameras, software, databases, and massive data centers in a world-spanning information fabric known as the Internet of Things.
So why do you like that definition?
I think because it brings together loads of different components of it. So it is about a networked environment, but it's also about a connection of things that are all networked together and can talk to each other in a kind of invisible way. Is this increasing networkability, like your fridge telling you when you're running out of milk, going to mean that we are more or less engaged with the physical and the material than we are now? Because as physical objects that we use every day, and it might be that a water bottle gets like a sensor in or something like that one day, is the data from that going to be the focus, or is it going to be the actual physical object that's the focus? So are we going to become less engaged or more engaged as the physical objects that we engage with every day become more increasingly networked? I guess that was my interest in it. Well, marketers are so far ahead of academics in thinking around some of these things, because actually all of the digital stuff we do, it's not always about the content, it's not always about the platform. About the technology, it is about the content, and sometimes it's easy to forget about that.
But when you look at that bottle of water and you talk about marketing, there's people in the world that don't have water, and there's people who don't have digital phones, and it's a real. We really need to think what we're doing with this digitality and how we're framing it. You know, as critical social psychologists, that's part of our mission.
People watching this and have got to the end will be interested in using digital methods. So I suppose whether you're starting or an experienced digital methods researcher, what would be our take-home message to them, I suppose?
I think my thing would be, and this would be the thing that I find that I'm optimistic about as well, is that you have unprecedented access to people's everyday lives and also to communities that might have been hidden or invisible before. And so we have a real privileged view into some of those things, and that's really exciting in a way that we would have struggled much more before to perhaps gain access to.
Real-time social self, what's the differences, similarities, what are people's experience, how do people experience that social self, that more intense, do you say, social self perhaps?
We can disseminate in ways that we couldn't have done before. Our participants are using images, and it has allowed people all to be archivists, to be artists. It has that, I think, wonderful potential, and that's why people are taking up, aren't they, and that ability to connect quickly.
But I think we do still feel very human, and I think that was the thing about the Internet of Things as well. Without us, there's nothing really doing anything. So for all the kind of post-structuralist, post-humanist thinking, which is all very useful and relevant for making sense of stuff, actually, and again it comes back to that sitting down in front of a computer or using a phone, it still feels very human.
But the other thing there is digital silence. So whereas we're talking about a lot of interconnectivity here, there's also a digital silence, and in that comes isolation somewhere. So I mean, that might be an interesting area for future research as well.
Yes, I think my advice would be read Stuart Hall. Read After Neoliberalism, which is absolutely nothing to do with the digital world at all, but that's the world.
I was thinking what would my advice be, and in a way it's what I've always done, which is read what the other disciplines are doing. What is good about psychology, and what I found with my research in the past, is we are so trained to be psychologists that however much you read in another discipline, you translate it into some kind of psychological framework, and that gives us the original contribution to these debates. So I think it is about reading as widely as possible, and then somehow translating it into what feels like the approach to now take with the questions that we might have about wearables or identity or any of these other issues that we think are important.
When I start a piece of research that's going to be like I'm thinking of as a digital piece of research, I nearly always start in a very narrow way, in the way that I've started every single research project, which is like some kind of spreadsheet, or like, having some set of codes or some set of themes or some research objectives, or if I'm doing a digital ethnography, it's like making the observation protocol and things like that. So there's a fundamental set of tools that you will have as a researcher and that you've always had, that you don't get thrown out the window when you decide to do it.
Talk about the way that, and actually I guess that's what we haven't talked about so much, is the way that those old methods do change, because you don't have in a real life ethnography, you've got a kind of particular amount of space in which you can go, and there's a particular time frame that happens in, whereas once you've reached the digital world, space suddenly expands, and you can go back and back for years.
But you would then need to have a set of protocols around how much you observed and looked at.
Or how to draw the bound, how to map that new territory, I suppose.
It's really difficult.
I think there's much more to the digital. Even watching TV is digital, it's not analogue anymore. So when we talk about digital media or digital cultures, they're much bigger than Facebook or being online.